Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome back to the Big Things from the Big Story podcast. We are so glad to have you here today. And this week, I've got with me Mike. How are you doing, brother?
Glad to be here. Doing well.
It is great to have the man and the legend sitting across from me here.
That's too much.
If you guys don't know Mike, I don't know how. Either you must not be connected to Blue Starr in any way, but Mike was the preacher here at Blue Starr for almost 30 years.
Correct.
Yep. Maybe 30 years exactly. It was really close.
Yep.
And you're most recently our newest shepherd that we've installed here at Blue Starr. And so
that's a pretty humbling experience.
That's really exciting for me. I'm really encouraged to have you leading the flock here with me, being a part of it. So
we're glad you're here.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I'm excited to have you here, and you're only the second elder that's been on here.
Okay.
Gene, and now you. So
okay.
We might have to, encourage some of the other elders that their time is coming.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay. Also, Mike is kind of the brainchild behind something really fun that we've got coming up here in just a couple of weeks. We are celebrating 120 years at Blue Starr.
Correct.
And so we're going to have a 120-year celebration weekend.
That's right. So the church began in Claremore actually a year before statehood.
Okay.
And it's hard to imagine that in any way. So it comes up to 120 years. Church actually began in the old Windsor House, Opera House. And it's hard to think about Claremore being that way as such. I'll kind of give a little detail in regard to Claremore. And in fact, Claremore at one point in time was actually larger than Tulsa.
It's kind of hard to believe.
It is hard to believe, yeah. So a lot of interesting details, a lot of things about Claremore, but also a lot of things about the church. And, of course, early beginnings are difficult to find anything.
Oh, yeah.
But we have some families, actually, that present today and during the celebration who actually were part of the First and Winona congregation when it was at First and Winona in Claremore, before moving out in the country on Blue Starr. So that tells you a lot of things about housing developments and everything else that's a part of that.
Yeah, that's crazy to think of.
Ethel Conrad is one of those, Marianne Linton as well, and the Busbys. So there's a lot of stories, and we have some previous preachers that are going to be here as well, too. So it'll be a great time.
Some current, more recent preachers will still be there.
Correct.
As well.
Yeah. So they're coming.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And going to tell some stories and different things like that. And so it's a good time to reunite with members who moved away or their involvement in those things. And so it's going to be a great time to be together.
Yeah, and I'm really excited because it's such a unique thing to get to see the picture of the congregation of history. I mean, usually, and I know you've been working through this, so it's been tough, but it's usually kind of lost. We were like, oh, we existed in the 50s sometime or whatever, and it's like, well, digging up some of these things, hearing some of the stories, and that's really cool for me, being relatively new here to Claremore.
Yeah. So I actually do have some pictures of the First and Winona Church after they tore the old rock church down.
Okay.
And built a block building, actually, that was there, and VBS that had over 150 children there as well, too. So we're just going to have a good time telling those things. Yeah. And Saturday evening, 6 to 8 o'clock, we'll have past members and past preachers who are going to tell stories. And so some of those will be with us on Sunday morning for Bible class, and then the opportunity to just worship together now as a congregation.
That's awesome.
Yeah, good experience.
So April 18th is the Saturday night event,
Correct.
And then April 19th, of course, Sunday morning Bible class, worship, and then we're going to have a potluck all together.
Fellowship meal together.
So if you want to find out more information about this, I'll leave the link down below. But we would love for you to come and RSVP. Let us know that you're coming. If you have any connection to the Blue Starr Church, or maybe you just think it sounds fun and cool, we would love to have you.
Join us.
If you're just kind of into the history of Claremore, 120 years. is a long time that we've been a part of this community. So thank you for putting that together, Mike.
Yes.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Well, the whole point of this show is to look at what we've been reading in the One Year Bible this week. And so I will give you just a little bit of a recap of where we've been in both the Old and the New Testament. So in the Old Testament this week, we finished out the last 13 verses of the book of Numbers and hopped into the book of Deuteronomy. And so as we're reading through Deuteronomy, it might seem really familiar because this is kind of Moses repeating the law that we've seen given throughout the Old Testament so far. In fact, Deuteronomy actually means a repetition of the law. And so Moses records this book as the Israelites are about to enter the Promised Land, as they're preparing to enter the Promised Land. And its purpose is to give to this next generation because it has been 40 years. And so a lot of the former generation has passed. So in the first 4 chapters, Moses looks back at God's faithfulness and Israel's humanity and failures and how they've disobeyed God. Yet God was still there. He guided them, protected them, and provided for them. And even Moses himself reflects on how because of his own disobedience, he's not allowed to enter into the Promised Land. At the end of chapter 4, Moses calls for obedience to God yet again, and the people of Israel are called to obey his commands and not add or take away from the word of God, something we quote pretty often here in Deuteronomy chapter 4. He warns them yet again against idolatry and taking on idols of other countries as they enter them. In chapters 5 and 6, Moses restates the 10 commandments and the covenant that God has given Israel. And in chapter 6, he states what Jesus would later call the greatest command, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. As we move into chapters 7 and 8, at the end of chapter 6, we are reminded of God's call for fathers to teach their children from generation to generation to never forget what God has done. And in chapter 7 and 8, like I said, Israel is reminded yet again that they are the chosen people set apart by God, and they need to remember him both in their prosperity and in their suffering. In chapters 9 and 10, Moses reminds them that God is not faithful because of their righteousness. In fact, he recalls some of their unrighteousness, including the golden calf, the stubbornness and rebellion, and how Moses himself has had to intercede on their behalf to God multiple times. In chapter 11, Moses recaps all of this by telling the nation of Israel that God says that if they obey him, they will be blessed, and if they disobey him, they will be cursed. In chapter 12, we have instructions on how they should live their life in the Promised Land, how they are to destroy all of the pagan articles of worship, that they should worship only at the place that God chooses and not be given in to the other nations' practices, but instead faithfully follow God's commandments. And that's kind of where we end up at the end of chapter 12 this week in the Old Testament. Was there anything in that quick little recap that you found interesting? I try my very best. It's hard to condense.
Yeah, it is hard to condense. It's interesting as you change into Deuteronomy, you have kind of a recap. Mm-hmm. And like you said, the reminder really of being faithful to God. And yet still the issue that we as humans face is that often we forget.
Yeah.
You know. So I was reminded as we went through that reading, because of the reminder, just the indication really for fathers to teach their children.
Yeah.
And for them to remember. It reminded me actually at the end of the Old Testament in Malachi, chapter 4 and 5 and 6, that God, by the Holy Spirit, instructed the idea that Elijah would come. Mm-hmm. When you get to Luke chapter 1, you find out that Elijah would come is actually John the Baptist.
Yes.
And I often refer to him as John the Baptizer.
Yeah.
But
not to be confused with the Baptist denomination.
Right. So it's interesting. I mean, that thought was that the thought really is that God intends fathers to turn their hearts toward their children.
Mm-hmm.
And then the instruction that children would turn their hearts toward their fathers.
Yeah.
I don't. You're young in fatherhood regarding things.
Absolutely.
And becoming a father is an amazing thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And you realize there's no instruction book that comes with this or anything else. But God really is interested in our children knowing Him.
Yeah.
So
and
that respect.
In the legacy of generations passing it on.
Right.
And
right.
It's a beautiful thing that God has designed, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just a couple weeks ago, we started Luke.
Mm-hmm.
So Luke chapter 1, verse 17, actually quotes Malachi chapter 4, 5, and 6 with the idea of returning the father's heart to their children. It's interesting that there's a change. If you look at Malachi reference, and then you look at Luke, this idea of returning, my translation says restore the hearts of the fathers toward their children. So our culture could learn a lot.
Yeah.
From that.
And Mike and I kind of talked about this a little bit. Sometimes we plan just a little bit before we get into the episode. But I know that there's statistics that even show that just having a present father completely changes the trajectory of a child's success in life.
Right.
So take that and add another level of, a godly father that is sharing his faith. And I know in our culture, it's kind of one of the things we shy away from, dads and men are not vulnerable, and we don't talk about the deep issues of our faith and our struggles. And I think that's something we can improve on and follow God's command, because it wasn't just for Israel. It wasn't just Moses. I think it's the continual call for God's people to father generations in that way.
And if we're serious about God, then we have to be serious about the instruction that is really given here.
Yeah, absolutely.
For teachers or for fathers to instruct their children.
Yeah. And this actually ties into one of my favorite pieces of scripture out of Deuteronomy, and it's in Deuteronomy chapter 6, but it's mentioned in chapter 4 and chapter 10. It's kind of hitting it all again. But I just want to read, on March 26th, we read Deuteronomy 6, starting here in verse 6. And this is what said, "And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." And I just love that imagery of everywhere you go, everything you say, no matter what you're facing in life, you shall have what God has taught you be the forefront of what you're teaching your children, what's in your life. You talk when you sit, when you stand, when you lay down, when you walk out the gate. It's a reminder of what God has done. And so I just love those few verses there in chapter 6.
And we've always heard the cliche, do what I say, not what I do, right? So just the seriousness of being a father with your children. You spoke about the trajectory that's there. And we can see that whether it's good or whether it's bad, right? The trajectory of their children are, God understands that trajectory as well, too.
Yes, absolutely.
And so that's why He gives us instruction here. I think that we have to understand it's one of the important things that God really reveals. And He wants each generation to learn the history. We talked about the 120 years. But what about our years? What about the future years in regard to our children?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What a good, steadfast instruction from God for every generation.
Yeah. So I thought that was a kind of an interesting combination, because we're in Luke as well. And I don't want to get ahead of things here, but Luke chapter 8, Jesus tells a story about the soils.
Yeah.
Parable of the soils.
Yeah.
So how does that reflect upon the idea of fathers to their children?
Yes.
Because the reflection of Malachi and even Luke chapter 1 is this idea that that turning or restoring the hearts of the fathers to the children to the father actually made preparation for the gospel.
Yeah.
So our children, perhaps, right? I mean, that's the indication. Our children, perhaps, are either open, or completely closed.
Right, they're also a soil.
By how we as fathers prepare them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
and
so that's kind of a scary thought too.
That's a really important thing to think about.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books, and this is not about other books. This is about the Word. But one of my favorite little books for fathers to read is called "The Intentional Father" by John. Yes. I can't remember his last name right now, but I'll give you a copy if you don't have a copy, if you come find me in the office. But one of the things he says in that book is you have to know the spirit and heart of your child, because not every child is the same.
That's
and I think sometimes we parent in a blanket way, and I'm learning this, we'll see how this goes in the next few years, but trying to figure out how your child is receptive to things. And that can really help them, like you were saying, be receptive to the message of God.
Yeah, so those who know Deb and I realize that I've shared the story. Our middle children, we have 4 children, but our middle children are twins. Mm-hmm. So it was so interesting regarding their personalities, how it changed even in the first 2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
Mindy, I could just look at Mindy almost, and she would cry, and I could talk to Wendy and look at her, with a stern concern, and she would just blow it off.
Oh man!
So it flips back and forth.
Very different personality.
I mean, wow! I mean, it is amazing that children can be so different.
Yeah.
And just as far as people are concerned,
yeah, absolutely,
we're all different. So we have to. Especially as fathers, you have to learn how to treat your children in the proper way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now some of you have practiced on your wives already and haven't done very well, but it's just one of those things to be reminded that.
Yeah. Well, since you kind of dipped our toes into the New Testament, I think it's probably time that we go give the New Testament recap. Yeah. So let's go ahead and look at what we read in the New Testament. We pick up in Luke chapter 5, right after Jesus calls Matthew to follow him in verse 29. And we see Matthew holding a great feast at his house for Jesus. And at this feast, there are many tax collectors and sinners there. And of course, the Pharisees and the scribes see this and see Jesus eating with them, and they mock him for eating with tax collectors and sinners. To which Jesus responds in verse 32 that I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Actually, a verse that I used in my sermon on Sunday. Mm-hmm. At the end of chapter 5, questions are brought up about fasting and other religious practices. And Jesus compares himself to a bridegroom and uses imagery of new cloth versus old garments and new wine versus old wineskin. And Jesus points out how he didn't come to fix their religion, but to bring something entirely new. As we enter into chapter 6, we see 2 things happening on the Sabbath day. Jesus' apostles pick grain, and Jesus himself heals a man's hand. Of course, this doesn't sit well with the religious leaders, but Jesus declares that he is the Son of Man and Lord over Sabbath, pointing to his authority over all law on earth. In the rest of chapter 6, we see Jesus continuing to choose and teach his disciples. We see the rest of the 12 apostles selected, and Jesus or preaches what we often call the Sermon on the Plain nowadays, which includes the teaching of the blessed R's, as well as the teaching of love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who persecute you, and also parables of like the blind leading the blind and the wise and foolish man. One built his house upon the rock and the other upon the sand. That's all in Luke chapter 6. In chapter 7, we see a Roman centurion who shows great faith in Jesus, and his servant is healed. And we also see Jesus raising the widow's son in Nain from the dead. At the end of chapter 7, we see the sinful woman who anoints Jesus' feet with ointment and wipes his feet with her hair. Jesus is ridiculed by a Pharisee man who says, he didn't even know, she's a sinner. Don't you recognize that? And instead of acknowledging that in the way that the Pharisee wanted, Jesus uses this as an opportunity to share that her sins are forgiven, and he is the one with the power to do that. As we finish up this week in chapter 8, Jesus teaches the parable of the sower and the different soils, like Mike just mentioned a minute ago, the parable of the lamp and putting it on a stand. And towards the end of this week's reading, we also see Jesus calming the storm, delivering the demon-possessed man who was many, legion, and showing his dominion over everything, the world, nature, darkness, fear, chaos. He is Lord over it all. And so we will end there with just a few verses left in chapter 8 as we move into our reading this next week.
Right.
There's lots of good stuff in the book of Luke. I mentioned this multiple times, but I really like Luke. I like all the details that he gives. And again, some of these stories are repeats, but not all of them are.
Right.
Like in chapter 7, the story of Nain, which is one of my favorite little teeny stories in the Gospels, is only in Luke. It's only recorded here in Luke chapter 7.
And I think you see, the thrust that Luke gives to the details for Theophilus, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a specific thing to, hey, I want to give you consecutive order of how things happened, and I want to tell you exactly who this Jesus is.
Yes.
So it's almost interesting. It's almost like a father teaching a son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it very much is.
Right. So
good tie-in, by the way. That's some next level stuff right there. That was good.
Yeah. So I just it always amazes me to go back through and read through again.
Yeah.
And I don't, whether it's things that happen in our life or whether it's just maybe connections or conversations that we've had with people or whatever, the put new wine in old wineskins. I was talking to somebody recently who just had struggles in their life.
Yeah.
And, trying to think about how do I get through this, type thing. And so it is one of those things that we just seem to try to fix the old tears that we have. And sometimes we just need to surrender.
Yeah.
And just do what Jesus says, or just do what God says, and not try to sew old threads or new thread into the old, right?
Not try to fit Jesus into what we were, but rather fit who we are into what Jesus calls us.
That's not always the easiest thing to do.
Not at all. Not at all.
And it does. I mean, it does take surrender to do that. It's
such a good analogy by Jesus, the wineskins in particular. I know the King James says bottles, which kind of ruins the analogy. So I prefer not the King James on this one. But how, if you think about what a wineskin is, we don't use them today really, but how it the old cracked leather, if you will, and the new wine full of its all its carbonation and it's all its goodness, fermenting,
right.
How it would break that because of the difference in the two. And that's a great analogy for our lives. And so that's why I really, even though I don't use wineskins ever, I can't think of any time that I would have used them. What a great analogy for our lives.
I think to me it would have been remembering my mom as a boy. You tear your jeans, right? The old jeans and, those type of things. And so you just can't patch that. Yeah. And sometimes we can't patch our lives with old relationships, or we can't patch our lives with old habits that maybe were there. and we just just need to surrender, which maybe leads into one of the things here at the congregation with Celebrate Recovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. When it comes to that, sometimes we just have to separate ourselves from old relationships.
From what was, yeah.
Yeah, or old friendships that suck us back into an old life.
Even locations and so many things. I'm reminded of what Paul says in Philippians, because Paul has a lot of history, a lot of past, and he says, forgetting what lies behind, pressing on towards the upward call, right? And so for Paul, that's a lot. He's pressing on, not thinking about what's in the past. And I remember years ago, I think actually you have the book on the shelf in here someplace, Mike, but there's a book called Habitudes, and it has this analogy of how a car has a giant front windshield and a teeny tiny rear view mirror. Yeah. Because you're only supposed to briefly acknowledge what's in the past, but you need to focus on what's ahead. Yeah. And that's how you successfully drive a car, and that's how you successfully follow Christ. Yeah. And
so sometimes I think maybe you feel like you're doing good, and then all of a sudden some old habit comes up somewhere.
Absolutely,
right? You just got to refocus.
Yeah.
So just a good reminder of an invitation Tuesday nights, right?
Yes. Tuesday nights here at Blue Starr. If you're local to Claremore, we would love to have you. There's a meal provided at 6:00, and then no matter what you're going through, there is no judgment. There's nothing too bad. Right. They are just here to support each other and to welcome you.
Yeah.
So,
and maybe you just need conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe you just need to talk to somebody.
Absolutely. So. Well, since we're in Luke, I do want to mention, we kind of mentioned it briefly, but my favorite story in Luke is also on March 26th this week, and it's in chapter 7, and it's only 11 through 17. That's that story of the widow's son in Nain. Mm-hmm. And if you've never read it before, or maybe you're just watching for the first time, I invite you, go find it in Luke chapter 7. But I just love this story because this little village that's talked about, Nain, is the middle of nowhere. Jesus is just passing by on this journey. And there's a widow whose only son has passed away, and the funeral is happening. Mm-hmm. And Jesus tells her, why are you crying? And the son raises from the dead. I mean, this is a quick-paced story. But I just love how in this story there's somebody who has nothing, who's lost it all. She doesn't have a husband. She doesn't have a son. She has no way to provide for her life anymore.
Right.
And she lives in the middle of nowhere. And Jesus still sees it as an opportunity to do great things in her life.
And he could have easily passed by.
He could have, yeah. He didn't need. There was no Buc-ee's to stop at in Nain. Right. It was the middle of nowhere, and so he didn't pass by, but instead he still did great things, great miracles. And at the very end of this story, we see that this message of Jesus spreads throughout the region because of this one little miracle that he did in nowhere. Yeah. And so I just love that story. I feel like I was raised in a very similar place, the middle of nowhere, but God can still do great things, and Jesus can do miracles, no matter what our situation is.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder for us to be observant, maybe.
Yeah.
With our surroundings and people. And, sometimes you just stop. I had a friend one time at church, and he was always a very positive guy, and his name was Mike as well, too. And I said, how are you doing today? And he says, I'm great and getting better. I mean, every time it was like that. And it finally just kind of got to me, and I said, Mike, it can't always be that way.
Oh, yeah.
Life isn't always that way. So, but to stop, and sometimes, we need to be serious about our questions that we ask people.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Well, if you ask the question, you better be ready to stay a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like when we say we'll pray for somebody. Yeah. We actually have to be prepared to pray for them.
Right. Right.
It's the same call that we have.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt to stop and pray then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes we're scared to do that for some reason.
Yeah.
So, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, was there anything else that you had either in the New Testament or the Old Testament that really stuck out to you this week?
No, I just think, this reminder that we need to always tell the next generation right?
Yes.
And especially our children. We always need to tell the next generation about God's wondrous story.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting that the Old Testament speaks, God himself speaks the idea, teach them to fear me.
Yeah.
And different perspective, type thing, but the idea of reverence.
Yeah.
I remember when I was just a young boy, my grandmother had a book about names, names for children.
Okay, yeah.
And then the names always had a definition.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to, you can go look up Mike. I'm not going to say what it is. But that humbled me.
Yeah.
To realize what my name meant. And interesting enough, now here in my late life, I still remember that.
Yeah.
And I still strive to respect what my name was called to be.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So, yeah.
In fact, Courtney and I were talking about names in Don't Get Any Ideas Anyway.
Okay, I was going to ask a question here.
But she was talking about, I think, the name Abigail, and just, referencing that to Scripture. And she's like, I wonder if somebody names their daughter Abigail, what the father looks like in that. I was like,
you don't want to be Nabal.
Yeah.
No Nabal, right?
You got to be a little critical thinking about some of those names. But that was just interesting because we were talking about that, I think, just yesterday when Courtney got back from their trip. So, Well, Mike, thank you so much for, not only joining us on Reading the 1 Year Bible. I know this is a different format for a lot of people and something new, but a lot of positive feedback. So thank you for that, but also for joining me on the podcast this week.
It was my
really
pleasure.
Excited.
My pleasure to do that.
Yeah. Well,
and, we love Blue Starr Church of Christ.
Yeah.
And we're just on this journey together.
Absolutely.
So glad that you and Courtney and Miley are here.
Yeah, and thank you for being a part of the encouragement and the team to do new things like this. I'm glad this didn't bring back any COVID PTSD for you sitting in front of a camera. But it's an incredible time here, not only at Blue Starr, but in the Lord's church across the world. So thank you for supporting that.
That's right.
Well, I'd like to leave us at the end of every episode with just a little wisdom that we read this week. And so on March 26th, we read Proverbs 11:28 that says, "Whoever trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like a green leaf."
Amen.
And I just think that is a beautiful picture of what we put our trust in. We put our trust in God and we serve him. We live righteously for him.
Yeah.
Well, Mike.
And remember to tell the next generation.
Absolutely. It ties right in.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being on the episode this week. And thank you guys for watching. If you'd like to leave your comments, we would love them. Leave them in the description or the comments below and join our Facebook group as we read the 1 Year Bible together. Until next week, this is the Big Things from the Big Story podcast. We'll see you next Monday.
God bless.